My parents emptied my trust fund to spoil my sister, assuming I'd stay quiet. But when the bank manager called with urgent news, their confident smiles faded because the account had a safeguard they never knew about. I'm Olivia Mercer, and my story begins with betrayal. At 25, I discovered my parents had secretly emptied my $2.7000000 trust fund, money my grandparents had left specifically for me, and transferred it all to my younger sister. They didn't just take my inheritance. They took my future, my security, and my faith in family. But when my phone rang at 6:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the bank manager's unexpected call set in motion a chain of events that would not only reveal the truth behind their deception, but transform me in ways I never imagined possible. Alarm blaring at 5:45 a.m., fumbling for my phone in the dark, mentally mapping out my workday as a junior architect at Harman & Associates. Nothing suggested it would become the day that divided my life into before and after. When my phone rang, the screen displaying unknown number, I almost didn't answer. Unknown calls at dawn rarely bring good news. Perhaps if I had let it go to voicemail, I'd still be living in blissful ignorance, still believing in the carefully constructed fiction my family had created. But I did answer, pressing the phone to my ear with a groggy, "Hello? Miss Mercer? Olivia Mercer?" The voice was measured, professional. "This is William Kensington from First Atlantic Private Banking. I apologize for calling at this hour, but I've been trying to reach you for several days. It's regarding your grandparents' trust, my grandparents' trust. The inheritance I'd been told was modest, designated for my education, long since depleted. The inheritance I hadn't thought about in years. I think there's been a mistake," I replied, sitting up in bed suddenly alert. "That trust was used for my college tuition. It's been closed for years." The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to make my heart rate accelerate. "Miss Mercer, according to our records, your grandparents established a trust in your name valued at approximately $27 million. The terms stipulated that you would gain access when you turned 25 or completed your graduate education, whichever came first. Our records indicate you turned 25 last month, yet when we attempted to transfer control to you we discovered..." He paused, his professional demeanor momentarily faltering. "We discovered a series of unauthorized withdrawals and transfers dating back 3 years. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the edge of my bed, trying to process what I was hearing. "That's impossible," I whispered. "There must be some mistake. My parents told me the trust was just enough for college, that it was gone." "Miss Mercer, the original trust was quite substantial. Your grandparents were quite successful in their investments. The documentation we have indicates that you were never meant to know the full value until you came of age, but that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because approximately 93% of the trust has been systematically withdrawn over the past 3 years." "By whom?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The trust had 2 CO trustees until your 20th birthday, yourself and your father, Elliot Mercer. The withdrawals were authorized by your father using a power of attorney document that he hesitated again. That appears to have been executed when you were 22. Do you recall signing such a document?" I closed my eyes, memory surging back with crystalline clarity. Senior year of college, home for Christmas, my father sliding a document across the dining room table while my mother refilled my eggnog. "Just some routine trust paperwork, Liv," he'd said casually. "The bank needs updated signatures since you're graduating soon." I'd signed without reading it carefully, a stack of papers in legal language, presented by my father, the respected federal judge, the man who had taught me right from wrong, the man I trusted implicitly. "Where did the money go?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. Another pause. I could hear Mr. Kensington's careful breathing, the slight tap of fingers on a keyboard. "The funds were transferred to another account at our institution, a trust established for Rebecca Mercer, my sister. My perfect golden 22-year-old sister. The Stanford medical student. The pride of the family. Miss Mercer, I'm calling because several markers in these transactions triggered our fraud detection protocols. While the power of attorney appears legally executed, the pattern of transfers, the timing, the amounts, the destination, raise concerns. As your grandparents' trust was established at our institution, we have certain fiduciary, can it be recovered?" I interrupted, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "That's complicated. Legally speaking, if the power of attorney was obtained fraudulently, or if the funds were used in a manner contrary to the trust's intended purpose, there may be grounds for recovery, but this would likely involve legal action against the CO trustee, against your father." "Legal action against my father, against the man whose approval I'd spent my entire life seeking, against the federal judge with connections throughout the legal system, against my family. I need to see everything, I said after a moment. All the documentation, all the transfer records, everything. Of course. We can arrange that. Would you be able to come to our main branch this morning? I've taken the liberty of clearing my schedule until noon. An hour later, I sat in a sterile conference room at First Atlantic Private Banking, staring at documents spread across a polished mahogany table, my grandfather's meticulous signature establishing the trust when I was born, my grandmother's will, reinforcing the bequest after her death when I was 12, the power of attorney I'd unknowingly signed, giving my father complete control, and the transfer records, dozens of them, systematic withdrawals moving my inheritance piece by piece into a trust for my sister. The largest transfer, nearly $800,000, had occurred just 3 months ago, coinciding with my sister's acceptance to Stanford Medical School. The same week my parents had taken her to Europe to celebrate, leaving me behind because someone needs to water the plants, Liv, and you know how busy you are at that firm. The same week I'd eaten ramen for dinner 4 nights straight, because my entry-level architect salary barely covered my rent and student loan payments for the master's degree. I'd taken out loans to finance. Loans I now knew had been unnecessary. Your grandparents were quite explicit in their intentions, Mr. Kensington said gently, sliding another document toward me. This letter was to be given to you upon assuming control of the trust. The letter was written in my grandmother's elegant script, dated just months before her death. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, you've reached an important milestone. The funds in this trust represent not just financial security, but a profound belief in your potential. Your grandfather and I always saw something special in you. A quiet determination, a brilliant mind that questions everything, a heart that feels deeply despite your attempts to hide it. We've arranged this trust to give you freedom. Freedom to pursue your passions without compromise. Freedom to make bold choices. Freedom from the financial anxiety that constrains so many bright minds. Use it wisely, but don't be afraid to use it joyfully. Your parents don't know the full extent of what we've set aside for you. This was deliberate. Your father, our son, has always had complicated views about wealth and its distribution. We felt it best that this remain between us until you're old enough to make your own decisions. Remember that buildings aren't the only things that need strong foundations. Build your life on truth, courage and compassion, and you'll never go wrong. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor, I traced my finger over her signature, feeling the slight indentation in the paper where she'd pressed her pen, imagining her writing these words while battling the cancer that would take her life months later. Words meant for me. Words I was meant to read 3 years ago. Miss Mercer? Mr. Kensington's voice pulled me back to the present. I should inform you that given the circumstances I've already consulted with our legal department. They believe you have grounds for legal action should you choose to pursue it. Legal action against my own father, against my family. What would that entail? I asked, surprised again by how calm I sounded when inside I was anything but. It would be challenging. Your father is a federal judge, which complicates matters. There would be significant attention, but the documentation is clear about your grandparents' intentions, and the manner in which the power of attorney was obtained appears questionable at best. I gathered the documents, organizing them into a neat stack, buying time while my mind raced through implications and possibilities. Through what this meant not just financially, but for everything I had believed about my family, about my place in it. Thank you, Mr. Kensington. I'll need some time to process this. He nodded, sliding his business card across the table. Of course. For what it's worth, Miss Mercer, I worked with your grandfather for many years. He was a man of extraordinary integrity. He would be deeply troubled by these events. I slipped the card into my pocket and gathered my belongings, moving on autopilot. The morning sun was blinding as I stepped out of the bank's revolving doors onto the crowded sidewalk. All around me people rushed to work, to meetings, to lives untouched by the revelation that had just shattered mine. My phone vibrated, a text from my boss asking where I was, another from my mother, a casual check-in that now seemed sinister in its normalcy. Lunch next week, sweetie. Your sister gets home from Stanford on Thursday. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, commuters streaming around me like water around a stone, as the full weight of what I'd learned settled onto my shoulders. My family had stolen from me not just money, but truth. They had looked me in the eye for years, watched me struggle with student loans, with rent, with the modest living of a junior architect, all while systematically transferring millions meant for me to my sister. And now I had to decide what to do about it. The world looked exactly the same as it had yesterday. But everything had changed. I was no longer the person I had been at 5:45 that morning. That person had believed in family loyalty above all, had accepted her place as the reliable but unremarkable elder daughter, had trusted without question. That person was gone, dissolved by William Kensington's phone call and the documents now weighing down my bag. In her place stood someone new, someone with a choice to make. I could confront my family, demand answers, fight for what was rightfully mine, or I could walk away, accept the loss, preserve what remained of my family relationships. As I finally stepped forward, rejoining the flow of humanity on the sidewalk, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. The foundation of my life had cracked irreparably, and what would rise from the rubble remained to be seen. But I was no longer the dutiful daughter who signed documents without reading them. I was Olivia Mercer, granddaughter of Eleanor and Robert Mercer. And for the first time in my life, I was truly seeing my family and myself with clear eyes. The truth is both destroyer and creator. It had destroyed the family I thought I had. I returned to work that day, mechanically completing tasks while my mind struggled to reconcile 25 of family history with the morning's revelations. My colleagues noticed something was off. The normally precise Olivia making uncharacteristic errors on dimensions, staring blankly at renderings, flinching when spoken to directly. "Rough night?" Marcus, the senior architect, asked as he returned a set of revisions covered in red marks. "Something like that," I murmured, forcing a smile. That felt like a grimace. By 5 I could no longer maintain the pretense of normalcy. I packed up my things, declined an invitation for happy hour, and stepped out into the early evening, directionless, but desperate for movement. My apartment, a cramped one-bedroom in an aging building far from downtown, had always been a point of pride. I'd found it myself, furnished it with carefully selected second-hand pieces, made it mine through determination and thrift. Now, crossing the threshold, it seemed to mock me with its modest dimensions and worn surfaces. For 3 years I had lived paycheck to paycheck calculating every expense, while my sister had summered in Europe, driven a luxury car gifted by our parents to keep her safe at school, and attended Stanford without a single student loan. All funded, I now knew, with my inheritance. I moved through my evening routine on autopilot, changing clothes, heating leftovers, checking mail. A letter from my student loan servicer reminded me that my deferment period was ending. The irony was almost physically painful. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages I couldn't bring myself to read. My parents, my boss, friends confirming weekend plans. The life I had constructed continued its forward momentum, while I remained frozen in the moment of revelation. At midnight, sleepless and restless, I did what architects do. I began to sketch. Not buildings or spaces, but a timeline. My grandparents, Eleanor and Robert Mercer, self-made entrepreneurs who had built a manufacturing company from nothing, and sold it for a fortune. When I was 10, my father, their only son, Elliot Mercer, the brilliant law student who had become the youngest federal judge in the state's history. My mother, Caroline Mercer, the elegant socialite whose family connections had paved my father's way into the upper echelons of society. And then there were the daughters, myself, Olivia, the steady, reliable eldest who had followed my father's practical advice to pursue architecture rather than my passion for environmental design, and Rebecca, 3 years younger, the golden child whose medical school ambitions had been celebrated and supported at every turn. I sketched our family dynamics as if they were structural elements, showing load-bearing relationships and stress points. The pattern emerged with cruel clarity, a lifetime of subtle favoritism, of expectations weighted differently, of achievements measured on separate scales. There had been clear signs, visible now in retrospect. The summer my architectural internship had been deemed sufficient experience, while my parents flew Rebecca to Honduras for a prestigious medical volunteer program. The used Toyota I'd received at graduation compared to Rebecca's new Mercedes. The constant reminders to be practical, be prudent, be realistic that accompanied my life choices, while Rebecca's ambitions were met with unfettered encouragement and support. I had accepted these disparities as normal, even reasonable. After all, medicine saved lives while architecture merely sheltered them. Rebecca's expensive education would serve humanity, while my more modest professional ambitions served only buildings and aesthetics. I had internalized this hierarchy of value so completely that I had never questioned why I alone carried student debt while Rebecca graduated unburdened. The question pulsing through me now was, had they always intended this deception, or had it evolved over time? Had they looked at their daughters, one steady but unexceptional, the other brilliant and charismatic, and made a calculated decision about resource allocation? Or had they simply convinced themselves that redirecting my inheritance to Rebecca served some greater good? By dawn, my sketch timeline had become a comprehensive map of familial betrayal, annotated with dates, events, and dollar amounts. I had recorded every instance I could remember of disparate treatment, of implicit and explicit messaging about my worth relative to my sisters. The pattern was undeniable, consistent, and deliberate. As the first light of morning filtered through my windows, illuminating the pages spread across my floor, I experienced a moment of perfect clarity. This was not about money, at least not entirely. This was about worth, about whose dreams deserved investment, about who was deemed worthy of opportunity, and who was expected to make do with less. My parents had not just stolen my inheritance, they had stolen my self-perception. They had cultivated in me a diminished sense of entitlement to opportunity, to support, to dreams commensurate with my abilities. They had carefully constructed a narrative in which my modest ambitions were natural, rather than conditioned, in which my practicality was innate, rather than imposed. And I had accepted it all, grateful for even the limited approval they offered, when I complied with their vision of who I should be. The realization was simultaneously devastating and liberating. If my understanding of my place in my family was built on lies, then perhaps my understanding of myself, of my potential, my value, my rightful expectations from life, was equally distorted. My phone rang, startling me from my reverie. My mother's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I considered answering, confronting her immediately with what I had learned. But the architect in me recognized poor structural planning. This confrontation required careful foundation work, proper support, strategic approach. I silenced the call and turned instead to my computer, typing asset recovery attorney into the search bar. The first consultation was scheduled for noon that day with Catherine Wu, a specialist in fiduciary breach cases whose website quoted Theodore Roosevelt, "No man is above the law, and no man is below it." The second appointment, at 2, was with Gabriel Martinez, whose firm had successfully handled several high-profile inheritance disputes. The third consultation, squeezed in at 4:30, was with Diane Lockhart, a former prosecutor whose specialty was cases involving ABT of power by authority figures. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, then methodically prepared for the consultations. I organized the bank documents chronologically, made copies of my grandmother's letter, and drafted a concise summary of the family dynamics that had contextualized the financial deception. Catherine Wu's office occupied half a floor in a downtown high-rise, the decor minimalist but expensive. She listened without interruption as I outlined my situation, her expression revealing nothing until I mentioned my father's position. "A federal judge," she repeated, making a note. "That complicates matters significantly." Because of his connections in the legal system, I supplied. "Yes. But also because of the public nature of such a case. If we proceed, you should be prepared for significant attention, much of it unwelcome. Cases involving prominent figures rarely remain private." "I understand," she nodded, making another note. "The facts of the case are compelling. The documentation is clear regarding your grandparents' intentions. The power of attorney appears to have been obtained through misrepresentation. There are grounds for legal action." "But," I prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation in her tone. "But these cases are rarely simple, Miss Mercer. They're emotionally complex, financially draining, and often take years to resolve. The burden of proof will be on you to demonstrate that your father's actions constituted a breach of fiduciary duty, rather than a reasonable reallocation of family resources. Even though the documents explicitly name me as the beneficiary, your father will likely argue that the power of attorney you signed gave him legal authority to make investment decisions on your behalf. He'll characterize the transfers to your sister's trust as investments in the family's collective future. A future physician versus an architect." The clinical assessment stung, though not because it was unexpected. I had sketched similar defensive arguments myself during my pre-dawn analysis. "So you're saying I should let it go, accept the theft?" Catherine Wu's expression softened slightly. "I'm saying you should understand exactly what you're undertaking if you choose to fight. This won't just be a legal battle, Miss Mercer. It will be a public declaration of war against your family. Are you prepared for what that means?" The question hung between us, weighted with implications beyond the legal realm. Was I prepared to sever ties with my parents? To expose family secrets to public scrutiny? To potentially estrange myself from my sister, who may have been an unwitting beneficiary, rather than an active conspirator? "I need to think about it," I admitted finally. She nodded, understanding. That's wise. These decisions shouldn't be made in the heat of emotion. My consultations with Gabriel Martinez and Diane Lockhart yielded similar assessments. I had a case, but pursuing it would come at significant personal cost. Each attorney outlined slightly different strategies, different timelines, different probabilities of success. Each asked in their own way if I was prepared for the collateral damage of challenging a federal judge, my father, in open court. By evening, I had 3 legal opinions, 3 potential pathways forward, and a decision to make that would irrevocably alter my relationship with my family. I walked home through the city as sunset painted the skyscrapers gold, feeling the weight of choice heavy on my shoulders. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Olivia, please call us. We're worried about you." Another followed immediately. "Your sister is coming home this weekend. We'd love to have family dinner on Sunday. Your favorite, pot roast." The casual normality of it, the pretense of familial warmth, ignited something molten inside me. They knew exactly where my inheritance had gone. They had orchestrated its diversion. They had watched me struggle financially while funding my sister's luxurious education with money explicitly left to me. And now they were inviting me to Sunday dinner as if nothing were amiss. In that moment, standing on a street corner as pedestrians streamed around me, I made my decision. Not about legal action that would require further consideration, but about truth. I would no longer participate in the fiction that our family operated on principles of equity and fairness. I would no longer pretend that the disparities in how my sister and I were treated were natural or justified. I texted back a single word, "No." Then I turned off my phone, continued home, and began to sketch again. Not a timeline of betrayal this time, but a blueprint for independence. A plan to reconstruct my life based not on the diminished expectations that had been carefully instilled in me, but on my own assessment of my worth and potential. The golden cage my parents had constructed. The one in which I had been the dutiful daughter accepting limited support while believing myself unworthy of more, now stood with its door ajar. The question was no longer whether I would leave it but how far I would fly once I did. Sunday dinner loomed like an approaching storm. After my terse refusal, my mother had called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that evolved from concerned to confused to coldly insistent. My father sent a single text. "Family matters should be discussed in person. We expect you Sunday." Not a request, a judicial decree. I spent the intervening days in a state of focused preparation. I requested copies of my credit reports, confirming my suspicion that my financial identity had been pristine until my parents' deception began. I contacted my company's HR department to increase my retirement contributions, a small but symbolic step toward financial self-determination. I researched renters' rights and tenant law, confirming that my lease couldn't be terminated even if my financial circumstances changed dramatically. Each action represented a buttress against potential fallout, a structural support for the independent life I was now determined to build. By Sunday morning, I had made my decision regarding legal action. I would pursue recovery of my inheritance, but only after one final opportunity for my parents to explain themselves, to recognize the magnitude of their betrayal, to make amends without legal compulsion. It was perhaps a naive hope, but one I needed to exhaust before committing to the nuclear option of family litigation. I dressed with deliberate care that morning, a charcoal pencil skirt and crisp white blouse that projected professional competence rather than daughterly compliance. I secured my hair in a precise chignon, applied minimal makeup, and wore the single piece of jewelry my grandmother had left me, a simple silver pendant inscribed with the words, "Build with integrity." The drive to my parents' home in the affluent suburb of Lakeshore Heights was so familiar I could have navigated it blindfolded. Every landmark triggered memories. The elementary school where I'd won the science fair, the park where my father had taught me to ride a bike, the library where I'd spent countless hours studying while my mother attended charity committee meetings. Each memory now required re-examination. Had my achievements always been measured against the unspoken expectation that I would never outshine? My sister, had my father's patient instruction been motivated by genuine connection, or by the obligation to ensure his less favored daughter could at least function competently in the world? Had those hours in the library been independence or subtle exclusion? The Mercer family home stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, its colonial architecture imposing yet tasteful, its manicured lawns and carefully tended flower beds declaring success without ostentation. My father's black Audi and my mother's silver Mercedes sat in the circular driveway, joined now by a glossy red BMW convertible that could only belong to Rebecca, home from Stanford. I parked my 7-year-old Toyota behind the luxury vehicles. The visual contrast, a perfect metaphor for our family's unacknowledged disparities. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell. Her expression a practiced blend of welcome and subtle disapproval. "Olivia, darling." Finally. We were beginning to worry. Caroline Mercer, at 58, remained striking. Ash blonde hair expertly colored and styled. Figure maintained through rigorous dedication to Pilates and tennis. Clothes impeccably tailored to conceal the minimal concessions to age. "Hello, Mother," I replied, accepting her air kiss without returning it. I said I wouldn't come, but apparently, my absence would have been more inconvenient than my presence. She drew back slightly, registering my tone. "Don't be difficult, Olivia. Your sister is home. Your father's been working too hard, and we wanted a pleasant family meal. Is that too much to ask?" The irony of her words that I was being difficult by disrupting the pleasant fiction of family harmony would have been comical if it weren't so infuriating. "I suppose that depends on what else might be asked of me," I replied, stepping past her into the foyer. My father emerged from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose, the Wall Street Journal folded under his arm. At 62, Elliot Mercer remained imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of authoritative presence that commanded courtrooms and family dinners with equal effectiveness. "Olivia, good of you to join us." His tone suggested I'd been invited to chambers for a minor reprimand. "Your sister just arrived from the airport. She's freshening up." No embrace, not even a handshake. My father had never been demonstrative, but I noted now the different quality of distance between us. Not the respect for personal boundaries he might have claimed, but a fundamental disconnection. As if I were a case to be managed rather than a daughter to be loved. "Judge Mercer," I acknowledged. The formal address, a small rebellion. His eyes narrowed slightly at the departure from Dad, but he said nothing. The living room was exactly as it had always been. Tasteful furnishings in neutral tones, family, photographs arranged in sterling silver frames, fresh flowers in crystal vases. I moved directly to the side table displaying those photographs, studying them with new eyes. There was Rebecca in her white coat at the Stanford Medical School orientation, Rebecca with our parents at her undergraduate graduation, Rebecca on a yacht during that European summer. Interspersed were obligatory images of me, architecture school graduation, a professional headshot from the firm's website, a candidate last year's Christmas dinner. "Your firm's project was featured in Design Quarterly," my father commented, moving to the bar cart to prepare his customary Sunday pre-dinner scotch. "The mixed-use development on Riverfront. They mentioned an innovative approach to sustainable materials." "Yes. Though they didn't credit the junior team members who actually developed that approach," I replied, turning from the photographs. "I believe proper attribution of ideas and contributions is important, don't you?" His hand paused momentarily in the act of pouring, the only indication that he registered the double meaning in my words. "Recognition comes with time and position. Olivia, you know that. And some positions are more deserving of recognition and support than others? Is that what you're suggesting?" His eyes met mine, something wary entering his expression. "I'm merely pointing out that career advancement follows predictable patterns. Patience is a virtue in professional development. As is honesty and fiduciary obligations, I imagine." The crystal tumbler connected with the cart surface with a sharp click. "If you have something to say, Olivia, say it directly. I didn't raise you to speak in riddles. You didn't raise me to question authority either. Did you? Particularly yours." "Honestly, Olivia," my mother interjected, her smile strained. "What's gotten into you? Your father was paying you a compliment about your firm's work. Was he? Or was he reminding me to know my place? To wait patiently for whatever recognition might eventually trickle down while more favored individuals receive immediate and substantial support?" A tense silence descended, broken by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her smile faltering as she registered the atmosphere. My sister had always been the family beauty. Our mother's delicate features combined with our father's confidence, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves, her figure both athletic and feminine. Today she wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, an expensive watch glinting on her wrist. "Liv," she exclaimed, moving to embrace me, "I've missed you. How's the architecture world? Still saving? The environment one sustainable building at a time?" I stepped back from her attempted hug, watching confusion and hurt flash across her face. "The architecture world is challenging when you're paying off student loans on a junior architect's salary. But then, you wouldn't know about that, would you? Rebecca glanced at our parents, bewilderment evident. What's going on? That's what I'd like to know, my mother said, her voice tight. Your sister arrived in some kind of mood. My father remained silent, studying me with the assessing gaze he likely used on witnesses whose testimony suddenly deviated from expected patterns. Perhaps we should eat, he finally suggested. Discussions are always more productive with proper sustenance. An excellent deflection, I observed. But I'm not hungry for pot roast. I'm hungry for explanations. Explanations for what? Rebecca asked, looking genuinely perplexed. I turned to face her directly. Do you know where the money for your education comes from, Becca? For your European summers? For that watch and that car outside? Our parents, obviously, she replied, her tone suggesting the question was absurd. Dad's judicial salary and their investments, the same place your education money came from? No, I said quietly. Not the same place at all. My father set down his scotch. Olivia, whatever concerns you have can be addressed privately. There's no need to create drama during a family dinner. Drama? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Is that what you call it when someone discovers they've been robbed of nearly $3 million by their own parents? The silence that followed was absolute. Rebecca's eyes widened in shock. My mother's hand flew to her throat, clutching her pearls in a gesture so stereotypical it would have been comical in another context. My father's expression, however, remained controlled, calculating. You've been speaking to William Kensington, he said flatly. Yes. Apparently, Grandma Eleanor's letter was supposed to reach me 3 years ago. Funny how that never happened. Letter? What letter? Rebecca asked, looking between us with growing alarm. What's going on? I kept my eyes fixed on my father. Would you like to explain, Judge Mercer, or shall I? He measured his words carefully. Your grandmother had certain notions about financial distribution that were impractical and ultimately detrimental to this family's collective welfare. Impractical? I repeated. Is that your legal opinion on the matter? Because First Atlantic's legal department has a different term for redirecting funds from a specifically designated trust beneficiary. They call it misappropriation. You don't understand the complexities, my mother interjected, her voice sharp with anxiety. Your sister's education is no more important than mine was, I finished. Yet, I'm carrying loans, while she's carrying a designer handbag. Explain the complexity in that, mother. Rebecca sank onto the sofa, her face pale. I don't understand. What trust? What money? I turned to her, softening my tone slightly. Grandma and Grandpa left me a trust worth nearly $3 million. I was supposed to receive control when I turned 25 or finished graduate school. But our parents diverted almost all of it to you over the past 3 years using a power of attorney document I signed without understanding. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror. That's not possible. Mom, Dad, tell her that's not true. It's not that simple, my father began, his tone measured. Resources should be allocated according to potential return. Rebecca's medical education represents an investment in your favorite daughter, I interrupted. Just admit it. You decided long ago which of us was worth investing in. You built an entire family mythology around Rebecca's superior intellect, superior ambition, superior worthiness. And when an inconvenient inheritance threatened that carefully constructed hierarchy, you simply redistributed it according to your own judgment. You make it sound malicious, my mother protested. We were thinking of the family's overall welfare. Were you? Or were you simply ensuring that the daughter you actually valued had every advantage while the one you considered less worthy was left to struggle unnecessarily? Rebecca stood up suddenly. Stop it. Just stop. I never knew about any trust. I never asked for this. Isn't about you, Becca, I said, raising a hand. At least not directly. You're as much a product of their manipulations as I am, just from the opposite direction. You were told you deserved everything. I was told to expect nothing beyond the basics. I turned back to my parents. I came here today hoping, foolishly perhaps, that you might offer some explanation that would make this betrayal comprehensible. Some justification that went beyond the obvious conclusion that you simply valued one daughter's future over the other's. My father's expression hardened. You're being melodramatic, Olivia. Financial decisions require pragmatism, not emotionalism. The allocation of resources was a practical matter, not a referendum on personal worth. Except it wasn't your allocation to make, I replied. The trust was explicitly established for me. Your pragmatic decision was, in fact, illegal. A breach of fiduciary duty. Fraud. Be very careful about making accusations, he warned. The judge entirely displacing the father, particularly ones you cannot substantiate. I reached into my bag and withdrew copies of the trust documents, the transfer records, my grandmother's letter. I can substantiate everything. The question is whether I'll need to do so in court. The threat hung in the air between us, transforming the familiar Sunday dinner tableau into something unrecognizable, a battlefield disguised as a family gathering. You would sue your own parents? My mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Create a public spectacle? Destroy your father's reputation? Tear this family apart over money? This family is already torn apart, I replied steadily. The facade of unity was maintained only by my ignorance and compliance. And this isn't about money. It's about betrayal, about the systematic undermining of my worth, my potential, my rightful opportunities. I gathered the documents and returned them to my bag, then faced my family. These strangers I had trusted implicitly for 25 years. I'm giving you one opportunity to make this right, I said. Restore what was taken from me, acknowledge the wrong done, and commit to genuine change in how this family operates. Otherwise, I will pursue every legal avenue available to recover my inheritance, and expose the truth regardless of the consequences to any of you. My father's expression was glacial. Consider carefully before you make threats you may regret. Olivia, the legal system is complex, outcomes are uncertain, and the process itself can be more damaging than any perceived injury you believe you've suffered. The implied threat that his position and connections could influence any legal action I might pursue only strengthened my resolve. I've considered very carefully, I replied. Have you? Because from where I stand, the regret in this situation belongs entirely to you. I turned and walked toward the door, pausing only when Rebecca called after me. Liv, wait. We need to talk about this. I had no idea. I know you didn't, I said, softening slightly at the genuine distress in her eyes. This isn't about you, Becca. It's about them, and the choices they made. When you're ready to have a conversation that isn't filtered through their narrative, call me. As I walked out the door of my childhood home, I felt simultaneously hollowed out and fortified. The family I had known was gone, had never truly existed except in the careful fiction my parents had constructed, and I had accepted. But in its place stood the possibility of something else, a life built on truth rather than comfortable lies, on self-determination rather than imposed limitations, on genuine worth rather than conditional approval. The architect in me recognized that sometimes the most necessary renovations begin with demolition. The week following the confrontation with my family unfolded with methodical precision. I took a calculated personal day from work, my second absence ever, and met with Catherine Wu, the attorney whose directness and strategic approach had resonated most strongly with me. Your situation is straightforward in legal terms, she explained, reviewing the trust documents spread across her conference table. The breach of fiduciary duty is clear. The paper trail is robust. The power of attorney was almost certainly obtained through misrepresentation, but, I prompted, hearing the unspoken qualification in her tone, but your father is Judge Elliot Mercer. His connections within the judicial system are extensive. While he can't directly influence a case in which he's personally involved, the reality is that judges tend to protect their own. We should anticipate procedural delays, aggressive defense tactics, and potential pressure from unexpected quarters. I nodded. Having already anticipated this reality, I understand the challenges. What's our first step? Catherine's strategy was methodical, beginning with a formal demand letter to my parents requesting full restoration of the trust, funds with interest, followed by a process of evidence gathering that would strengthen our position should the case proceed to litigation. We need to establish a comprehensive timeline, she explained. Not just of the financial transfers, but of the pattern of behavior that contextualizes them. When did the disparate treatment between you and your sister begin? Were there other instances of financial manipulation? Did your parents make statements about your inheritance that prove they knew about its intended purpose? For the next several days, I became an investigator into my own past. I requested copies of my undergraduate and graduate financial aid applications which contained parental income declarations. I searched through years of email correspondence with my parents, looking for discussions about money, education funding, and career expectations. I compiled a detailed record of gifts, opportunities and support provided to Rebecca versus those provided to me. The digital archaeology revealed patterns more systematic than even I had realized. Emails in which my father discouraged me from pursuing a more prestigious but expensive graduate program. Be practical, Olivia. The loans would be crippling. and your mother and I can only stretch our support so far." Contemporaneous communications with Rebecca encouraged her to aim for the stars regardless of cost. "Don't worry about money, Becca. Some investments are worth making, and your education is our priority." There were birthday gifts that demonstrated the disparity in tangible terms. A professional wardrobe allowance of $500 for my 20th birthday, versus the European vacation for Rebecca's. The consistent narrative that medical school represented a necessary investment while my architectural master's degree was an optional credential that I should only pursue if I could justify the expense. Most damning were the financial aid documents that proved my parents had been fully aware of their obligations as trustees of my grandparents' bequest, even as they claimed financial limitations in supporting my education. I compiled everything into a meticulous digital archive, organized chronologically and thematically with annotations highlighting the patterns of favoritism and deliberate misrepresentation. When I presented this evidence to Catherine, she reviewed it with growing confidence. "This corroborates the financial evidence beautifully," she noted. "It establishes intent and pattern, not just isolated actions. The contrast in how educational and professional opportunities were framed for you versus your sister is particularly compelling." "Will it be enough?" I asked. "In a normal case? Absolutely. Given your father's position, it gives us leverage. Judge Mercer can't afford for these details to become public record, regardless of the ultimate legal outcome." The demand letter was drafted, reviewed, and finalized. A clear statement of the breach, the evidence supporting our claims, and the specific remedies sought. Full restoration of the trust funds, with interest plus legal fees and additional damages for the breach of fiduciary duty. Before authorizing Catherine to send it, I took one final step, one that the attorney in me knew was unnecessary, but the daughter in me needed to attempt. I called my sister. Rebecca answered on the first ring, her voice tentative. "Liv, I've been trying to reach you, I know. I needed time to think." I kept my tone neutral, factual. "I'm calling because I'm about to take formal legal action against our parents. Before I do, I wanted to speak with you directly." The silence stretched between us, heavy with unasked questions. "They're saying it's complicated," she finally offered. "That there were financial arrangements you don't understand, that they were trying to do what was best for both of us in the long run." I had expected this, the continuation of the narrative that I was simply too limited in my understanding to grasp the sophisticated financial decisions made by our parents. "Do you believe that?" I asked simply. Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know what to believe," she admitted. "I never questioned where the money for my education came from. I just accepted it. Because you were raised to believe you deserved every advantage," I observed without rancor, "just as I was raised to believe I should be grateful for whatever limited support I received." "Was it really that explicit?" she asked, a note of genuine distress entering her voice. "Were they really that obvious about favoring me?" In retrospect, yes. Though the messaging was subtle enough that I internalized it without question. I was practical, reliable, solid. You were exceptional, brilliant, full of potential. These weren't just personality observations. They were value assignments that determined how resources would be allocated. Rebecca's breathing changed, a subtle catch suggesting she was fighting tears. "I never saw it that way." "You weren't meant to," I replied. The narrative worked precisely because neither of us questioned it. "What will happen now?" she asked after a moment. "With the legal action, I mean. Our parents will receive a formal demand letter outlining the breach of fiduciary duty and requesting full restoration of the misappropriated funds. They'll have 14 days to respond before we file a civil suit." "And my education money? The funds they've already spent on Stanford?" The question revealed her central concern, and I couldn't blame her for it. She was 3 years into an elite medical education. If our parents had been transparent about my inheritance, if they had said, "This exists, but we believe some of it should support your sister's medical training," we could have had a reasonable discussion about family priorities. Instead, they lied, manipulated, and stole. "They're terrified," she admitted quietly. "Dad hasn't slept. Mom keeps crying. They're convinced you're going to destroy everything." "They destroyed the foundation of trust that families are built on," I replied steadily. "That happened long before I discovered the financial deception." After another silence, Rebecca asked, "Can we meet? Just you and me? I need to understand exactly what happened, and I can't get a straight answer from them." We arranged to meet the following evening at a coffee shop midway between our respective residences. The neutral territory seemed appropriate for what would essentially be a diplomatic mission between estranged nations. She arrived first, securing a corner table away from other patrons. Her appearance surprised me. The designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face bare of makeup. She looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the sister I had grown up with before our paths diverged so dramatically. "I brought these," she said without preamble, sliding a folder across the table. "I requested copies of all my financial aid documents from Stanford. I thought you should see them." The folder contained detailed records of payments made toward Rebecca's medical education, over $320,000 over 3 years, with each payment coming from a trust account that matched the number of my grandparents' bequest. "I had no idea," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I swear to you, Liv. I thought it was coming from their savings, from investments. I never questioned it because they always said money for education was non-negotiable, that it was their priority. For you?" I added quietly. "Not for me." She nodded, tears finally spilling over. "I see that now. I see so many things I didn't let myself see before." I reached for the documents, examining the payment records, adding them to my mental timeline of the misappropriation. "These will be helpful for the legal case." "Thank you." "I don't want to testify against our parents," Rebecca said quickly, wiping at her cheeks. "I can't do that, but I also can't pretend this was okay. What they did to you was wrong. Deeply wrong." "I'm not asking you to testify," I assured her. "These records speak for themselves." She reached across the table, hesitating before placing her hand over mine. "What can I do to make this right between us?" The question caught me off guard. In my focused pursuit of legal remedies, I had given little thought to potential reconciliation with my sister, the unwitting beneficiary of my parents' deception. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm still processing what it means that every advantage you received, every opportunity I was denied, was funded with resources that were explicitly meant for me." "I can't undo my education," she said softly. "I can't give back what's already been spent." "No, you can't," I agreed. "And I wouldn't ask you to abandon your medical training. That's not the point." "Then, what is the point? What do you want from me?" The question was genuine, her expression open and pained. For the first time I could see her not as the golden child who had effortlessly received every advantage, but as another kind of victim in our parents' manipulative system, one who had been elevated at my expense without her knowledge or consent. "I want you to see me," I said finally, "not as the practical, reliable sister who doesn't need or deserve the same support you received. Not as the architect with modest ambitions compared to your world-changing medical career, but as someone equally worthy of investment, opportunity, and belief." Rebecca's face crumpled. "I always saw you that way," she whispered. "You were the one who had it together, who knew exactly what she wanted, who never seemed to doubt herself. I was terrified of failing, of not living up to expectations. You seemed so sure." The revelation was startling, that my resignation to limited expectations had been interpreted as confidence, that my acceptance of constrained opportunities had been seen as clarity of purpose. "I wasn't sure," I told her. "I was conditioned to believe I shouldn't ask for more. That wanting more was presumptuous, unrealistic." We talked for hours, comparing our experiences of the same family events, the same parental messaging, from our radically different positions within the family hierarchy. The conversation was painful, but illuminating, revealing how thoroughly we had both been shaped by our parents' favoritism, me through diminished expectations, Rebecca through crushing pressure to justify the preferential treatment. By the time we parted, we had reached an understanding, not reconciliation exactly, but a mutual recognition of our shared manipulation and a tentative commitment to forge a relationship based on truth rather than our parents' careful fiction. "I'll help, however I can," Rebecca promised as we stood to leave. "I can't take their side in this, not now that I understand what really happened." The next morning, Catherine Wu sent the formal demand letter to my parents. By afternoon, my father's attorney had called to request a meeting. They wanted to discuss settlement options, Catherine informed me. "That's faster than I expected. They must be worried about publicity, or they're stalling for time to hide assets," I suggested, my trust now irrevocably damaged. "We filed for temporary injunctions preventing further movement of the trust funds," she assured me. "If they're looking to settle, it's because they recognize their position is untenable." The meeting was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I continued my normal routine at work, though nothing felt normal anymore. My colleagues noticed the change in me, a new assertiveness in design meetings, a willingness to advocate for my environmental innovations rather than accepting their relegation to future consideration. Marcus, the senior architect who had previously dismissed my sustainable material proposals, found himself repeatedly challenged by my well-researched counter-arguments. "You've changed," he observed, after a particularly heated exchange about reclaimed timber sourcing. 3 months ago, you would have backed down. 3 months ago, I was operating under the illusion that patience and deference would eventually be rewarded with recognition, I replied. I've since learned that value must be claimed, not awaited. My transformation wasn't limited to work. I began researching environmental design certifications that I had previously considered beyond my reach. I enrolled in an evening course on innovative urban sustainability practices. I started sketching concept designs for projects that aligned with my true passions rather than the practical career path my father had prescribed. Each action represented a reclamation, not just of stolen funds, but of stolen potential. Of the self I might have become, had I not been conditioned to expect and accept less than I deserved. As the settlement meeting approached, I prepared myself for what would likely be an emotional confrontation disguised as a legal negotiation. My parents would be present, as would their attorney, a former colleague of my father's from his days in private practice. Catherine advised me to remain silent throughout most of the meeting, to let her handle the technical aspects while focusing solely on the outcome, full restoration of my inheritance. "This isn't about reconciliation," she reminded me. "I have a life advice for you, my subscriber. You must listen this and learn from this advice. Oh, truly benefit from today's technology in your daily life. Start by using it intentionally, not just for entertainment, but as a tool for growth. Leverage apps for productivity, like Time Manager's Forest, Todoist, or skill-building platforms Coursera, Khan Academy, to learn something new each day. Use AI assistants to brainstorm ideas, solve problems, or even practice communication skills. Automate repetitive tasks, set reminders for bills, use smart home devices to save time, or let AI summarize articles so you absorb knowledge faster. Stay connected meaningfully. Video calls and messaging apps bridge distances, but prioritize real conversations over mindless scrolling. To help others, share useful tech tips with those less familiar. Teach an elder how to use digital payments. Guide a friend through online job applications, or create content that simplifies complex topics. Be cautious of over-reliance, set screen time limits, take digital detoxes, and protect your privacy. Technology is a powerful ally when used wisely. It can educate, streamline your life, and amplify your ability to assist others, but balance is key. Let it enhance your humanity, not replace it. Keep exploring, stay curious, and use these tools not just to live easier but to live better. Now back to the story. It's about remedy. Keep your emotions in check, and let the evidence speak for itself. Sound advice, professionally speaking. But as I laid out my clothes for the meeting, a structured blazer, tailored pants, and my grandmother's silver pendant, I knew that no matter how clinical the proceedings might be, they represented something far more profound than financial recovery. They represented my declaration of independence from a family system built on inequality, my rejection of a narrative that had limited my horizons, and my first steps toward becoming not the daughter my parents had decided I should be, but the woman I would choose to become. The law offices of Brennan, Woodward & Shaw occupied the 37th floor of a downtown high-rise, their reception area. A study in calculated intimidation, soaring ceilings, museum-quality artwork, and windows offering panoramic views of the city below. The message was clear. Power resided here, and it did not welcome challenge. Catherine Wu seemed entirely unimpressed as we were escorted to Conference Room C by an impeccably dressed assistant. "Standard theater," she murmured. "They're hoping the setting itself will make you more amenable to compromise." "It won't," I assured her, taking in the Brazilian rosewood conference table, the leather chairs, the crystal water service, all markers of privilege and establishment that would once have intimidated me into compliance. We were the first to arrive, a strategic decision on Catherine's part. "Let them come to us," she had explained. "Small psychological advantages matter in these situations." I used the time to review our evidence once more, though I had memorized every document, every date, every dollar amount. The exercise wasn't about information, but about focus, channeling my emotional response into precise, factual recall. At exactly 2 South p.m., the door opened. Lawrence Brennan entered first, silver-haired Brooks Brothers suited, exuding the easy confidence of a man accustomed to deference. My father's longtime friend and former law partner, now representing my parents against their own daughter. My father followed, his judicial demeanor firmly in place, expressionless, controlled, radiating authority. My mother entered last, her delicate features composed into a mask of dignified suffering, her Hermes scarf and understated jewelry communicating both wealth and restraint. No, Rebecca. I had half expected her presence either as moral support for our parents, or as a gesture of solidarity with me. Her absence suggested she had chosen the only tenable position, neutrality in a conflict that would inevitably reshape our family regardless of outcome. No introductions were exchanged. None were necessary. Lawrence Brennan took his seat directly across from Catherine, arranging his monogrammed leather portfolio with deliberate precision. Before we begin, he stated, I want to establish that this meeting is being conducted in the spirit of good faith negotiation, and is subject to standard confidentiality provisions. Nothing discussed here constitutes an admission of liability or wrongdoing by my clients. Catherine nodded coolly. Understood. Though given the nature of the evidence in our possession, the question of wrongdoing seems rather settled. Brennan's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Miss Wu, inflammatory characterizations will not facilitate productive discussion. Neither will pretense, she countered. The facts are clear. Judge Mercer and Mrs. Mercer diverted approximately $5 million from a trust explicitly established for Miss Olivia Mercer's benefit, using a power of attorney document obtained through misrepresentation. These funds were transferred to accounts benefiting their younger daughter, Rebecca Mercer, without Olivia's knowledge or consent. My father cleared his throat. The situation is more nuanced than Elliot, Brennan warned quietly. Let me handle this. My father subsided, though the muscle working in his jaw betrayed his frustration at being silenced in his own defense. My mother reached for the water service, her hand trembling slightly as she poured herself a glass, ice cubes clinking against crystal. My clients acknowledged that certain financial decisions were made regarding family resources, Brennan continued smoothly. These decisions were made with the entire family's best interests in mind, balancing immediate needs against long-term considerations. Family resources, Catherine echoed, her eyebrows raising slightly. The Eleanor and Robert Mercer Trust was explicitly established for Olivia Mercer's benefit. It was not a family slush fund to be allocated according to Judge Mercer's preferences. The trust was established when Miss Mercer was an infant, Brennan countered. Her grandparents could not have anticipated the specific educational and professional paths their granddaughters would eventually pursue. As trustees, Judge and Mrs. Mercer had a responsibility to interpret the trust's purpose in light of evolving circumstances. Catherine opened her portfolio and extracted a document protected by a plastic sleeve. Perhaps this will clarify the grantor's intentions, she said, sliding the letter across the table. Eleanor Mercer's instructions to be delivered to Olivia, upon assuming control of the trust, make her intentions quite explicit. My father didn't reach for the letter. He didn't need to read it. He had obviously seen it before, had made the deliberate decision to withhold it from me. My mother, however, extended a manicured hand to draw the document closer, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. Color drained from her face as she read. You weren't supposed to see this yet, she whispered, seemingly forgetting the context of the meeting. Not until everything was settled with Rebecca's education. Brennan shot her a warning look. But the damage was done. The admission hung in the air between us. Confirmation that they had deliberately delayed my access to the trust until my sister's needs were met, regardless of my grandmother's explicit wishes. Let's be practical, Brennan suggested, recalibrating his approach. What is it you want, Olivia? Surely not a protracted legal battle that would damage your family irreparably, not public exposure that would harm your father's reputation, and, by extension, your own professional standing. There must be a way to resolve this privately, to everyone's satisfaction. Before Catherine could respond, I leaned forward. I want what was taken from me, I stated, my voice steady. Every dollar, with interest. I want acknowledgement of the wrong done. I want assurance that my sister's education will not be jeopardized by the necessary correction of this injustice. And I want this resolved without public litigation. Not to protect my father's reputation, but to spare my grandparents' memory the indignity of having their wishes so flagrantly disregarded by their own son. My father's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. You speak as if we stole from you, as if we acted out of malice rather than parental judgment. We made decisions based on the needs and potentials we observed. Your sister's medical education is no more valuable than my architectural aspirations, I interrupted. That's the fallacy at the heart of your justification. You decided long before either of us had demonstrated our professional potential, that her path deserved full support, while mine warranted only the minimum necessary investment. We supported your education, my mother protested. Your undergraduate degree was largely funded by merit scholarships I earned myself, I finished. My graduate degree is financed through loans I'm still repaying. Meanwhile, Rebecca has never filled out a FAFSA form or calculated a debt-to-income ratio. The disparity was by design, not necessity. Brennan intervened smoothly. These family dynamics, while important to you, are separate from the legal question at hand. Let's focus on resolution. What specific terms would you find acceptable to settle this matter without litigation? Catherine outlined our demands with precision. Full restoration of the misappropriated funds plus 6% annual interest, establishment of an independent trustee to manage the restored assets, coverage of all legal fees incurred, and a formal acknowledgement of breach of fiduciary duty. This is extortion, my father muttered, his judicial mask slipping further. No, Elliot, my mother said softly, surprising everyone at the table. It's accountability. She turned to me, really looking at me perhaps for the first time in years. We convinced ourselves we were making responsible choices, she admitted, that allocating resources based on perceived potential was simply good stewardship. We never acknowledged the bias in our assessments, or questioned why we consistently saw more promise in Rebecca's path than in yours. My father stared at her, clearly unprepared for this departure from their united front. Caroline, this is neither the time nor the place. It's exactly the time, she countered with unexpected firmness, before the lawyers draft agreements and we pretend this was merely a financial misunderstanding. We favored Rebecca, we always have. We justified it with rationalizations about her needing more support, being less self-sufficient than Olivia, having chosen a more demanding field. But the truth is simpler and uglier. We poured our resources and approval into the daughter who reflected our preferences and prejudices, while conditioning the other to expect and accept less. The conference room fell silent. Catherine maintained her professional composure, but I caught the slight widening of her eyes. She had not anticipated this confession any more than I had. My father's face flushed with anger, embarrassment, or perhaps a complex mixture of both. This is completely inappropriate, he snapped. We're here to discuss financial arrangements, not to engage in amateur psychoanalysis. The financial arrangements were a manifestation of the underlying dynamics, my mother replied, her voice strengthening. Olivia deserves to hear the truth, not more careful evasions. She turned back to me. I won't ask for your forgiveness. What we did was unforgivable. Not just the diversion of funds, but the years of subtle messaging that shaped how you see yourself. What you believe you deserve. I can only say that I see it now with painful clarity, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry. The apology, unexpected, unqualified, hit me with physical force. I had prepared for denials, for legal maneuvering, for attempts to minimize the breach of trust. I had not prepared for acknowledgement, for genuine contrition, especially from my mother, who had always deferred to my father's judgment in family matters. Caroline, that's enough, my father warned, his tone hardening to the one he likely used to silence courtroom disruptions. No, Elliot. It isn't enough. It isn't nearly enough. She straightened in her chair, addressing Brennan now. We will accept the terms as presented. The funds will be restored in full with interest. The legal fees will be covered. The acknowledgement will be made. Brennan looked to my father, clearly expecting him to countermand this unilateral decision. Judge Elliot Mercer, however, seemed to have finally recognized the untenable nature of his position. With the evidence arrayed against him, with his wife's unexpected defection from their joint defense, with his daughter's unwavering determination to pursue justice, his options had narrowed to one: strategic surrender. Draft the agreement, he instructed Brennan tersely. We'll settle. Catherine nodded, satisfaction evident in the slight upward curve of her lips. Wise decision. We'll need the first transfer of funds within 5 business days as a show of good faith. Fine, my father agreed. His voice clipped. Is there anything else? I looked directly at him for the first time since he had entered the room. This man who had shaped my understanding of authority, of justice, of familial obligation. This man who had systematically undermined my sense of entitlement to opportunity while enhancing my sister's. This man who had justified theft as wise stewardship and favoritism as pragmatic resource allocation. Yes, I said quietly. There is one more thing. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me, would you have ever intended for me to receive my inheritance if I hadn't discovered the truth? Or would you have continued redirecting it until nothing remained? He held my gaze for a long moment. Calculation visible in his expression, weighing truth against expedience, honesty against salvaging some remnant of his moral authority. We would have told you eventually, he finally stated. Once Rebecca's education was fully funded, Once the most pressing financial obligations were met, and how much would have been left for me at that point? I pressed another pause. Enough, he offered vaguely. A reasonable portion. A reasonable portion of my own inheritance, I echoed. How generous of you. My mother reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. Olivia, I know this doesn't change what happened, but I need you to know that I see now how wrong we were. Not just about the money, but about everything. How we supported you, what we expected from you, what we convinced you to expect from yourself. I withdrew my hand slightly, not yet ready for reconciliation despite the unexpected acknowledgement. You're right. It doesn't change what happened, but it's a start. The meeting concluded with arrangements for the formal settlement agreement to be drafted and reviewed. As we gathered our materials to leave, my father made one final attempt to reassert control over the narrative. I hope you'll consider the impact of this situation on your sister, he said. Rebecca is innocent in all this. Her education shouldn't suffer because of our mistake. I've already spoken with Rebecca, I informed him. She understands what happened far better than you seem to think. And unlike you, I have no intention of punishing one daughter to benefit another. Her education will continue. The difference is that now it will be funded honestly with her knowledge and consent, rather than through deception and theft. As Catherine and I rode the elevator down from the rarefied heights of the law firm, I felt a curious lightness despite the emotional intensity of the meeting. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in my financial prospects, but in my understanding of myself and my place in the world. That went better than expected, Catherine observed. Your mother's intervention was unusual. Family disputes rarely feature such unambiguous admissions of wrongdoing. She surprised me too, I admitted. I always thought of her as an extension of my father's will, not as someone capable of independent moral reckoning. People can surprise you, especially when confronted with irrefutable evidence of their failures, Catherine noted. The question is, where do you go from here? The money will be restored. But what about the relationships? It was the question I had been avoiding. What kind of relationship, if any, I could or should maintain with the parents who had betrayed me so fundamentally? With the sister who had benefited from that betrayal, however innocently? I don't know yet, I replied. Honestly, restoration isn't the same as reconstruction. As we exited the building into the bright afternoon sunlight, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was truly free, not just financially, but, psychologically, free from the artificial constraints imposed by my parents' selective support, free from the narrative of limited potential that had shaped my choices and expectations. The architect in me recognized this moment for what it was, not the end of a difficult renovation, but the clearing of a site for entirely new construction. The foundations had been laid bare, the faulty structures demolished. What would rise in their place remained to be determined by my choices, my values, my authentic vision for my life. That vision, still forming but increasingly clear, extended far beyond the recovery of stolen funds. It encompassed the reclamation of stolen possibility, the career paths not taken, the risks not ventured, the potential not fully expressed, because I had internalized the message that my aspirations deserved only limited investment. As I walked toward the future I would now design for myself, I carried with me not just the promise of financial security, but something far more valuable. The knowledge that I was and had always been worthy of investment, worthy of opportunity, worthy of belief. The trust fund would be restored. The greater trust in myself, in my value, in my right to claim the full measure of my potential, was already rebuilt stronger than before. The settlement agreement was executed with remarkable efficiency. Within 3 weeks the first transfer appeared in the newly established trust account. $1. $2 million reclaimed from various investment vehicles my father had used to house my diverted inheritance. The remaining $3 million plus calculated interest would follow in 2 additional installments over the next month. Catherine had insisted on an independent trustee, a fiduciary with no connection to my family, to oversee the restored funds until the full amount was transferred and I assumed complete control. Jordan Lawson, a trust specialist with an impeccable reputation for ethical management, provided weekly updates on the restoration process with a transparency that stood in stark contrast to my parents' years of deception. The second transfer is scheduled for Friday, he informed me during our 3rd weekly call. Another $800,000 plus applicable interest. The funds are coming from your sister's trust, which is being proportionally reduced rather than eliminated. This arrangement preserves sufficient capital to complete her medical education without additional loans. I had insisted on this provision, not out of concern for my parents' finances, but to ensure Rebecca wouldn't suffer educational disruption because of their misconduct. The solution represented a balanced approach to remedy, restoring what was rightfully mine while acknowledging that my sister shouldn't bear the full burden of our parents' wrongdoing. And my parents' acknowledgement of breach? I asked, referring to the formal statement they had agreed to provide. It's been drafted and is undergoing final review by their counsel, Jordan replied. Miss Wu has been coordinating that aspect directly. The carefully negotiated restoration of my inheritance was proceeding according to plan, the legal machinery functioning with precision. My financial future had been reclaimed through a process that was clinical, orderly, and contained. The emotional aftermath, however, was neither clinical nor contained. As the initial shock of discovery and confrontation receded, I found myself in freefall, untethered from the family structure and narratives that had, however dysfunctionally, provided the framework for my identity. The ground beneath me had dissolved, revealing that it had been illusory all along. Now I was suspended between what had been and what might be, with no clear sense of how or where I would land. The sensation manifested physically as well as emotionally. I experienced periods of insomnia followed by exhaustion, appetite fluctuations, moments of disorientation in familiar places. My body seemed to be processing the trauma that my mind had temporarily sublimated in the focused pursuit of legal remedy. This is normal. Dr. Elise Sharma, the therapist I had begun seeing weekly, assured me during our third session. You're experiencing a profound disruption of your fundamental trust, not just in your parents, but in your understanding of reality itself. The narrative you constructed about your family, your place within it, your value and potential. All of it requires revision in light of what you've learned. I should feel vindicated, I admitted, staring at the abstract painting hanging behind her desk. Blues and grays swirling into patterns that almost, but not quite, resolved into recognizable forms. I won. The money's being restored. My parents had to acknowledge what they did. But instead, I feel hollow. Dr. Sharma nodded, her expression thoughtful. Vindication is a poor substitute for the unconditional love and support that should have been your birthright. You've secured justice. But justice doesn't heal the wound of betrayal. That's a separate process. How do I even begin that process? Every memory now requires re-examination. Every family interaction. Every decision about my education or career. Every comparison between my sister and me. It's all tainted by the knowledge of their fundamental dishonesty. Start by acknowledging that your perceptions weren't wrong, she suggested. The inequity you sensed but couldn't quite articulate. It was real. The feeling that you were being held to different standards than your sister, also real. Your parents' deception required your compliance, which they secured by conditioning you to doubt your own observations and accept their narrative as objective truth. This perspective that my intuitive sense of unfairness had been accurate all along, despite my parents' careful gaslighting, was both validating and disturbing. For years I had suppressed my awareness of the disparities in how my sister and I were treated, accepting the rationalizations offered. Rebecca needed more support. Medicine was more demanding than architecture. Her potential contributions to society warranted greater investment. I let them convince me that wanting more was selfish. I realized aloud that my ambitions were less worthy of support, that my dreams were luxuries rather than legitimate aspirations. And now, Dr. Sharma prompted, now that you know the truth about their manipulation, how does that change your understanding of your own desires and ambitions? The question crystallized, something that had been forming at the edges of my consciousness since the confrontation with my parents. If their assessment of my potential had been deliberately diminished to justify redirecting resources to my sister, then their guidance about my career path, the practical, modest, realistic path they had encouraged, might be equally suspect. I think I've been building a career based on their limited vision of what I could or should become, I said slowly. I chose conventional architecture over environmental design because they convinced me it was more practical, more secure. I stayed at a firm that consistently sidelined my sustainability innovations because challenging the status quo seemed presumptuous. And if you were to set aside their limitations, if you were to assume that your potential is as boundless as they pretended your sister's was, what might you pursue instead? The question opened a door I had kept firmly closed for years. Behind it waited the dreams I had carefully packed away as unrealistic, impractical, beyond my rightful expectations. Specialized training in cutting-edge sustainable design projects focused on environmental innovation rather than conventional development. Perhaps even my own practice dedicated to regenerative architecture. I'd focus entirely on environmental design, I admitted, the words coming more easily than I expected. Not just green buildings but regenerative architecture. Structures that actively heal environmental damage, rather than merely minimizing harm. It's where my passion has always been, but I let myself be convinced it was too idealistic, too niche. By your parents? Initially, yes. My father called it a luxury specialty when I first expressed interest during undergraduate studies. He suggested it was something I could dabble in after establishing myself in conventional architecture. My mother worried it wouldn't provide reliable income. They never explicitly forbade it, but they made you question whether you deserved to pursue it, Dr. Sharma finished. Whether your dreams warranted the same level of investment and risk that your sisters did. Exactly. The recognition felt like a weight lifting, not just from my shoulders, but from my imagination itself. And I internalized their assessment so completely that even after achieving financial independence, I continued to limit my professional aspirations accordingly. That's how effective conditioning works, Dr. Sharma observed. It persists long after the external constraints are removed because it becomes self-imposed. The insight resonated deeply. My parents' theft of my inheritance represented a tangible, quantifiable harm that could be addressed through legal channels. But their theft of my self-belief, their systematic diminishment of my sense of entitlement to opportunity and support was a subtler, more insidious injury, one that legal remedies couldn't touch. So what now? I asked, genuinely uncertain. The money's being restored, but how do I restore the confidence, the ambition, the sense of possibility they spent years undermining? The same way you reclaimed your inheritance, Dr. Sharma replied. Through conscious recognition of what was taken, clear-eyed assessment of the mechanisms of theft, and deliberate action to restore what was lost. The difference is that this process happens internally, rather than through external systems like courts. That sounds daunting. It is, she acknowledged. But you've already begun. The very fact that you can articulate these realizations indicates that the restoration is underway. The question is how far you're willing to go in reclaiming not just financial resources, but the full scope of your potential. As I left her office that afternoon, I found myself considering that question with new intensity. The settlement would soon be complete, the legal battle won. The funds that should have been mine all along would soon be fully restored. But what about the aspirations, the confidence, the sense of limitless possibility that had been systematically stripped from me? How would I reclaim those less tangible but arguably more valuable assets? The answer began to form as I walked past a small gallery displaying architectural designs for urban renewal projects. A sign in the window announced, an upcoming lecture series on regenerative design principles by Helena Rosenthal, a pioneer in the field I had long admired from a cautious distance. Without hesitation, I pushed open the gallery door and approached the receptionist. Is registration still open for the Rosenthal lecture series? It is. But space is limited, she replied. The sessions include workshop components, so they're capping attendance at 30 participants. I'd like to register, I stated, reaching for my credit card. A small but decisive step toward reclamation. That evening, I received a text from Rebecca. Mom told me about the second transfer. Are you okay with everything? Can we talk soon? My relationship with my sister remained complicated. A delicate negotiation between recognizing her unwitting role in our parents' scheme and acknowledging our shared manipulation, albeit from opposite sides of the favoritism equation. We had spoken only briefly since the settlement proceedings began, our conversations carefully constrained to practical matters related to the financial reorganization. I stared at her message, considering my response. The easy answer would be to maintain distance, to protect myself from further family entanglements while I processed my own healing. But isolation, I was beginning to realize, represented another form of limitation, one that I was now imposing on myself rather than accepting from others. I'm okay, I texted back. Things are proceeding as agreed, and yes, we can talk. Dinner. Tomorrow? Her response came immediately. Name the place. I'll be there. We met at a small Ethiopian restaurant equidistant from our respective apartments, neutral territory that held no family associations. Rebecca arrived first, securing a corner table that offered privacy without isolation. She looked different than she had at our coffee shop meeting, not diminished exactly but more subdued. Her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. Thank you for meeting me, she said, as I slid into the seat across from her. I wasn't sure you would. I'm not sure I should, I admitted. But avoiding each other seems pointless when we're the only two people who truly understand what happened in our family. She nodded, accepting this assessment. How are you really? Beyond the logistics of the settlement? The question was genuine, her expression open and concerned. In that moment, I saw her not as the golden child who had benefited from my parents' favoritism, but as another young woman trying to reconcile the family she thought she had with the reality she now faced. "I'm in free fall," I confessed, surprising myself with the honesty. Everything I thought I knew about our family, about my place in it, about what I deserved or could expect, it's all been revealed as a carefully constructed fiction. I'm still trying to figure out who I am outside of that fiction. "I understand that better than you might think," she replied quietly. "Learning that my success was built on resources taken from you, it's forced me to question everything too. Am I actually deserving of the opportunities I've had? Would I have achieved anything without the excessive advantages they provided? Is my entire identity just a product of their preferential treatment?" The vulnerability in her questions mirrored my own existential uncertainty. We had both been shaped by our parents' manipulation, I through diminishment, she through elevation. And now we were both struggling to discern our authentic selves amid the distorting influence of their unequal investment. "I don't blame you," I said after a moment. "You didn't know where the money was coming from. You didn't create the system of favoritism. You just grew up within it." "But I accepted it," she countered. "I never questioned why I received so much while you received so little. I took it as a natural reflection of our different paths, our different potentials. I was complicit through my silence, my unquestioning acceptance of privileges I now know were stolen from you." Her acknowledgement, similar to our mother's unexpected confession during the settlement meeting, caught me off guard. I had prepared myself for defensiveness, for attempts to minimize the disparity in our treatment, or justify the diversion of my inheritance as necessary for her education. The frank admission of complicity, however, unwitting, suggested a capacity for honest self-reflection that our parents had largely lacked. "What happens now?" she asked. "Between us, I mean. Can we rebuild something? Or is the damage too fundamental?" I considered the question seriously, examining my feelings without the distorting lens of familial obligation, or the ingrained habit of self-sacrifice that had characterized so much of my relationship with my family. "I don't know," I answered. "Honestly, I think we need to build something new, rather than trying to rehabilitate a relationship that was founded on inequality. But I'm not ready to give up on having a sister, even if the sister I thought I had never really existed." Relief flickered across her features. "I'd like that. To build something new, something real this time." As we shared the injera bread and various stews served family style on a large platter, our conversation gradually shifted from the weighty topics of betrayal and identity to more immediate matters. Rebecca spoke about her medical studies, but with a new self-awareness about the privileges that had smoothed her path. I shared my recent registration for the Regenerative Design Lecture Series, my tentative steps toward reclaiming professional aspirations I had long suppressed. "You'd be amazing at that," she said with genuine enthusiasm. "I remember those sketches. You used to do. Buildings that incorporated living systems, that generated more energy than they consumed. Even in high school, your ideas were revolutionary." The recognition that she had seen and valued my passion, even when our parents had dismissed it as impractical, offered a small but meaningful counterbalance to years of having my ambitions minimized. By the time we parted, something had shifted between us. Not reconciliation exactly, but the beginning of a more honest connection. One built on clear-eyed acknowledgement of the past, rather than the careful evasions and unspoken hierarchies that had characterized our previous relationship. As I walked home through the warm evening, I realized that the sensation of free fall had subtly changed. I was still suspended between my old life and whatever would come next. Still untethered from the family structure that had defined me for 25 years. But the terror of that suspension had begun to transform into something else. A recognition that free fall, while frightening, also represented a form of flight. The ground I had lost, the false foundation of my family's conditional support and manufactured narrative, was not worth regaining. What awaited me at the end of this free fall was not a crash, but the opportunity to land on terrain of my own choosing. To build a life structured according to my authentic potential, rather than their limited vision of what I deserved. For the first time since William Kensington's early morning phone call had shattered my understanding of my family, I felt something unexpected stirring beneath the hurt and anger and disorientation. A tentative but growing sense of liberation. The final transfer arrived on a Wednesday morning in early October. $895 $400 plus accumulated interest deposited into the trust account that would soon be under my complete control. With this transaction, the formal restoration of my inheritance was complete. The legal battle had been won with surprising efficiency, the settlement executed according to terms. The financial remedy secured in full. "Congratulations," Catherine Wu said when she called to confirm the transfer. "The funds are now being prepared for transition to your direct management. Jordan will schedule a final meeting to review your options and complete the necessary paperwork." "Thank you," I replied. The words inadequate for the transformation her advocacy had helped facilitate. "For everything. You did the hard part," she noted. "Standing up to family is infinitely more difficult than navigating legal processes. Most people in your situation would have accepted some form of compromise rather than pursuing full restoration." "I couldn't compromise," I told her. "Not when the underlying issue wasn't really about money, but about recognition of worth." "Precisely why I took your case," Catherine said. "Well done, Olivia. Your grandparents would be proud." After we disconnected, I sat at my desk in the firm's office, staring at the email confirmation from Jordan Lawson. $2.7 million interest, soon to be under my direct control. Financial security beyond anything I had imagined possible when I had been living paycheck to paycheck, carefully budgeting for even minor professional expenses, like specialized software or conference registrations. The money represented freedom from student debt, from housing insecurity, from the constant calculations of affordability that had constrained my choices. But more significantly, it represented vindication, proof that my grandparents had seen value in me worthy of substantial investment, that my future had been deemed worthy of meaningful support. With that vindication came responsibility. How would I use this restored resource? What would I build with this inheritance that represented not just financial capital, but my grandparents' belief in my potential? The questions lingered as I moved through my workday, reviewing construction documents for the mid-rise apartment complex that represented my primary project at Harmon & Associates. The design was competent but conventional, energy efficient by current standards, but far from the regenerative principles I had advocated for and seen repeatedly sidelined as too experimental or cost-prohibitive. Marcus passed my desk just before lunch, dropping a marked-up set of elevations onto my keyboard. "Client wants traditional brick facing instead of the living wall system you proposed. Says it's more marketable to their demographic." I stared at the revisions, seeing in them the pattern that had defined my professional experience thus far. Innovative environmental solutions, systematically replaced with conventional approaches. My expertise acknowledged, but ultimately disregarded. My vision subordinated to market considerations deemed more important than ecological impact. The living wall would reduce heating and cooling costs by at least 18%, I pointed out. It would improve air quality for residents and contribute to urban biodiversity. The maintenance costs are offset by energy savings within 7 years. Marcus shrugged. "Client doesn't care. They want brick because brick sells. Make the changes by Thursday." As he walked away, I felt something shift within me. A quiet but definitive click, like a lock disengaging. For years, I had accepted such dismissals as the natural order of architectural practice. I had internalized the message that my environmental priorities were secondary to market concerns, just as I had internalized my parents' message that my aspirations were secondary to my sister's. But that acceptance had been predicated on a sense of limited options, of constrained possibilities. The financial reality of my restored inheritance suddenly expanded those possibilities in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. I turned back to my computer and opened a browser tab, searching for Helena Rosenthal Regenerative Design. The pioneering architect's website showcased projects that perfectly aligned with my suppressed ambitions. Buildings that generated more energy than they consumed, that purified water and air, that created habitat for displaced wildlife within urban contexts. At the bottom of the page, a small notice caught my attention. Seeking experienced architect with passion for regenerative design principles to join our growing team. Position based in Portland office with potential for hybrid arrangement. My heart rate accelerated as I clicked through to the job description. The role required exactly the skills I had been developing on my own time, while my official work focused on conventional projects. The application deadline was the following week. For a moment, I hesitated. The ingrained caution of someone accustomed to limited options asserting itself. Portland was across the country. The position might pay less than my current role. The firm was smaller, potentially less stable. The practical considerations my parents had instilled in me surfaced automatically, but alongside them came a new awareness. I could afford to take risks now. I could prioritize alignment with my values over immediate financial calculations. I could make choices based on passion and purpose, rather than practicality and security. I began drafting my application during lunch, pulling together examples of environmental design concepts I had developed independently. Sustainability innovations. I had proposed, though rarely seen implemented, at Harman and Associates, research I had conducted on regenerative architectural principles. By the time I returned to my desk, I had made a decision. Regardless of the outcome with Rosenthal's firm, it was time to leave Harman and Associates. The secured inheritance provided a safety net that transformed risk from reckless endangerment to calculated opportunity, the same kind of opportunity my sister had always been encouraged to pursue. I was preparing to email my application when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a Portland area code. For a moment I stared at it in confusion, wondering if the universe operated on coincidences more profound than I had previously believed. Olivia Mercer speaking, I answered cautiously. Miss Mercer, this is Cole Washington with Rosenthal Design Partners. The voice was warm, the accent slightly southern. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all, I managed, still processing the bizarre timing. How can I help you? I'm calling because Helena Rosenthal asked me to reach out to you directly. She attended your presentation at last month's Sustainable Design Forum in Chicago, and was quite impressed with your approach to integrating natural water filtration systems into urban housing developments. The presentation he referenced had been a minor breakout session I had conducted while attending the forum on my own time and expense, a small act of professional independence that my firm hadn't supported or acknowledged. That's unexpected, I admitted. I wasn't aware she was in the audience. Cole laughed lightly. Helena has a habit of showing up in unexpected places when she's scouting talent. She specifically mentioned your response during the Q&A about prioritizing regenerative capacity over conventional aesthetic considerations. It aligned perfectly with our firm's philosophy. I'm familiar with your firm's work, I told him, trying to maintain professional composure despite my growing excitement. Miss Rosenthal's approach to regenerative design has been influential in my own thinking. That's precisely why I'm calling. We have an opening for a project architect with your specific interest in water integrated systems. Helena suggested I contact you directly to gauge your interest before the position is publicly posted. The opportunity being presented wasn't just a job. It was alignment. The chance to work with a pioneer in the exact specialized field I had been drawn to but discouraged from pursuing. A position that valued the very expertise and perspective that had been repeatedly sidelined at my current firm. I'm definitely interested, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. In fact, I was just preparing an application for another position I saw posted on your website. Perfect timing then, Cole observed. Would you be available for a video interview later this week? Helena would like to speak with you directly. We scheduled the interview for Friday morning. As I hung up, a strange sensation washed over me, a feeling of pieces falling into place, of currents aligning after years of swimming against the tide. The call from Cole Washington wasn't merely fortunate timing. It represented something more profound, recognition of value from someone who had no obligation to provide it. Unlike my parents' conditional assessment of my worth, Helena Rosenthal's interest stemmed solely from recognition of my work, my ideas, my potential contribution to a field I was passionate about. That evening I met with Jordan Lawson to finalize the transition of my trust funds to direct management. He presented options for investment, recommended financial advisors specialized in wealth management for creative professionals, and outlined tax considerations related to potential career transitions. Many clients in your position, receiving substantial assets after building independent lives, feel pressure to make immediate dramatic changes, he observed as we concluded our meeting. My advice is to take time for discernment. This inheritance represents both opportunity and responsibility. How you deploy it should reflect carefully considered priorities, rather than reactive impulses. I actually received an unexpected opportunity today, I told him, describing the call from Rosenthal Design Partners. It would mean relocating to Portland, potentially taking a salary reduction initially, but working directly in the specialized field I'm most passionate about. Jordan nodded thoughtfully. That's precisely the kind of opportunity that financial security makes possible, prioritizing alignment and growth potential over immediate compensation. Your restored assets provide a buffer that transforms such a move from risky to strategic. My parents would call it impractical, I noted, the observation carrying less emotional charge than it might have weeks earlier. With respect, your parents' financial judgment has proven questionable at best, Jordan replied with diplomatic understatement. Their assessment of practicality seems primarily concerned with maintaining established patterns rather than maximizing potential. The gentle rebuke of my parents' perspective from this objective financial professional reinforced my growing recognition. Their guidance had never been about helping me make optimal choices, but about keeping me within boundaries they had predetermined based on their own biases. When I returned to my apartment that evening, I found an unexpected package waiting at my door. A slim box wrapped in simple brown paper with no return address. Inside was a book, Regenerative Architecture, Designing for Healing by Helena Rosenthal. A note was tucked between the pages, handwritten on cream-colored stationery. Olivia, your work came to my attention at precisely the right moment. Our industry needs voices like yours. Advocates who understand that true sustainability isn't about minimizing harm, but about creating systems that actively restore what's been damaged. I look forward to our conversation on Friday. In the meantime, this book outlines the principles that guide our practice. Your water integration concepts suggest you're already thinking along similar lines. With appreciation for your perspective, Helena Rosenthal. I traced my fingers over the signature, marveling at the unexpected personal touch from someone whose work I had admired from afar. The book wasn't merely a professional courtesy. It was an acknowledgement of shared vision, a recognition of value that required no family connection or obligation. That night I stayed up until dawn reading Rosenthal's book, finding in her philosophy the articulation of principles I had intuited, but never seen fully implemented. Her approach integrated ecological systems, community needs, and aesthetic considerations into a coherent whole that prioritized healing of environments, of communities, of the disconnection between human habitation and natural systems. As morning light filtered through my windows, I reached a decision that felt both daring and inevitable. I would pursue the position with Rosenthal Design Partners regardless of potential financial implications. I would relocate to Portland if offered the role. I would use my newly secured resources not as a safety net for continuing along a conventional path, but as a launching pad for the career I had always wanted but been discouraged from pursuing. The inheritance my grandparents had left me, the one my parents had attempted to redirect, would now serve its intended purpose, providing the freedom to pursue my fullest potential without compromise. On Friday morning, I prepared for my interview with Helena Rosenthal with a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. I gathered my portfolio, including concepts and designs that had been developed during evening hours and weekends, the work that represented my authentic vision rather than my firm's commercial priorities. As I waited for the video call to connect, I glanced at my grandmother's letter, which I had framed and placed on my desk as a daily reminder of her intention. Use it wisely, but don't be afraid to use it joyfully. The call connected, revealing Helena Rosenthal, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the focused intensity of someone who had spent decades fighting to transform an industry resistant to change. "Olivia Mercer," she said, her voice carrying the warmth that had infused her writing. "Thank you for making time to speak with me. I believe we may have quite a lot to discuss about the future of regenerative design." In that moment, I recognized the call for what it was, not just a job interview, but an unexpected lifeline thrown precisely when I needed it most. A connection to the path I had always wanted to pursue, but been conditioned to believe was beyond my reach. The architect in me appreciated the structural elegance of the timing. How the restoration of my inheritance and the emergence of this professional opportunity had converged to create a foundation for transformation far stronger than either element alone could have provided. As I began to share my vision for water-integrated urban systems with Helena Rosenthal, I felt the last vestiges of my parents' limiting narrative finally dissolve. In its place emerged something more powerful than financial security, more valuable than professional opportunity, the conviction that I was and had always been worthy of investment, worthy of pursuing excellence without compromise, worthy of building a life shaped by passion rather than pragmatism. The unexpected lifeline had appeared not by chance, but because I had finally positioned myself to recognize and grasp it by reclaiming not just my inheritance, but my right to define success on my own terms. The video interview with Helena Rosenthal extended well beyond the scheduled hour, evolving from a formal assessment into an energetic exchange of ideas about regenerative design principles. Her questions probed beyond technical knowledge into philosophical territory. How should architecture address climate adaptation? What responsibility do designers bear for the social impact of their creations? How might buildings serve as active participants in ecosystem restoration, rather than mere settings for human activity? "Your perspective on water systems is particularly compelling," Helena noted, as our conversation reached the 2-hour mark. "Most architects approach water management as a problem to solve. You see it as an opportunity to create value on multiple levels: ecological, aesthetic, experiential. Water is the ultimate connector," I explained, sharing my screen to display concepts I developed for urban housing that integrated visible water flow as both functional infrastructure and design element. It can simultaneously address practical needs while creating emotional resonance through sound, movement, and visual interest. Helena studied the designs thoughtfully. These concepts are sophisticated, especially considering your current firm's conventional portfolio. Have any been implemented? No, I admitted. At Harmon and Associates, environmental innovations are typically valued in theory, but deemed too experimental for actual projects. These designs represent my independent work, developed outside office hours. She nodded, unsurprised. The gap between institutional rhetoric about sustainability and willingness to implement truly regenerative approaches remains frustratingly wide, which is precisely why we've built our practice around clients who specifically seek environmental leadership rather than mere compliance. By the interview's conclusion, Helena's interest had crystallized into a concrete offer. A senior design position at Rosenthal Design Partners' Portland office, leading water integration strategies for their expanding portfolio of regenerative projects. The salary was indeed lower than my current compensation at Harmon and Associates, but included profit sharing and substantial autonomy over project development. We need your response within 2 weeks, she explained. We're assembling a team for the Cascade Commons project, a mixed-use development committed to water-positive design. It would be an ideal showcase for your specific expertise. The offer represented everything I had secretly wanted, but been conditioned to believe was impractical, unrealistic, beyond my proper expectations. Now it sat before me, concrete and attainable, challenging me to step beyond the limitations I had internalized. I'm deeply interested, I told her. I just need time to consider the logistics of relocation. Of course, Portland's housing market can be challenging, particularly if you're unfamiliar with the neighborhoods. I'll have Cole send information about areas that might align with your preferences. After disconnecting, I sat in stillness, absorbing the significance of what had just occurred. An internationally respected architect had recognized value in precisely the work my current firm consistently marginalized. She had offered not just employment but partnership in advancing principles I deeply believed in. The opportunity was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. Portland was 3,000 miles away from everything familiar: my apartment, my limited but established professional network, the city I had navigated with increasing confidence since college. The position would require learning entirely new professional systems, building relationships from scratch, establishing credibility in an unfamiliar community. My phone chimed with an email notification from Cole, Washington, containing information about Portland neighborhoods, estimated relocation costs, and contact information for real estate agents familiar with the firm's previous transplants. This thoroughness of the resources underscored the seriousness of their interest, while making the prospect of relocation feel more manageable. A second email arrived moments later, this one from Jordan Lawson, confirming that the final paperwork for the trust transition had been processed. My inheritance was now fully restored and under my direct control. The independent trustees, oversight no longer necessary. Perfect timing, I murmured, recognizing how the convergence of financial security and professional opportunity created possibilities that neither element alone could have provided. The following Monday, I requested a meeting with Diane Harmon, the firm's founding principal. Her assistant's eyebrows raised slightly at my request. Junior architects rarely sought direct audiences with the firm's leadership, but scheduled 30 minutes for Wednesday afternoon. I spent the intervening time preparing a detailed transition plan for my current projects, organizing documentation, and creating comprehensive handoff materials. Whatever decision I ultimately made about Rosenthal's offer, I was determined to conduct myself with the professionalism that had always characterized my work. On Wednesday, I arrived at Diane's office precisely on time, portfolio and project transition documents in hand. Her corner office offered sweeping views of the city's skyline, many buildings she had personally designed during 4 decades of conventional architectural practice. Olivia. She greeted me with polite curiosity. This is an unexpected request. How can I help you? I've received an offer from Rosenthal Design Partners to lead water integration strategies for their regenerative projects, I stated directly, placing my formal resignation letter on her desk. I've prepared comprehensive transition documentation for my current assignments to ensure minimal disruption. Diane's expression registered surprise, followed quickly by calculation. At 62, she had navigated decades of professional transitions and clearly recognized the significance of losing a junior architect to a firm with Rosenthal's reputation. Helena's operation is certainly innovative, she acknowledged, examining my letter. though smaller and less established than what we offer here. Have you considered the career implications of moving to a boutique firm focused on experimental approaches? The security we provide? With respect, I interrupted gently, my decision isn't primarily about security or advancement in conventional terms. It's about alignment between my professional work and my core values regarding environmental design. She studied me with renewed attention. I wasn't aware you had such strong feelings about Rosenthal's approach. You've never advocated for similar directions in our project meetings. I have, actually. The living wall system for the Westridge development, the rainwater collection and filtration proposal for Columbia Heights, the passive cooling strategies for the University Research Center, all were presented with supporting research, and subsequently replaced with conventional systems. Diane's expression shifted as she mentally reviewed these projects. Those were your concepts? I was under the impression they came from our sustainability consultants. They were my designs, developed from my research. The attribution wasn't always clear in the presentations brought to your level. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Recognition of how promising innovations from junior team members could be obscured within hierarchical structures. How talent could be overlooked through systematic patterns of credit distribution. That's unfortunate, she said carefully. And something we should address organizationally. Perhaps we could discuss how a specialized role focusing on regenerative systems might be created for you here with appropriate recognition and resource allocation. The offer to create a position that would theoretically address my interest without requiring relocation was precisely the kind of compromise that would have seemed miraculous just months earlier. Before William Kensington's phone call, before the discovery of my parents' systematic undermining of my inheritance and opportunities, before the recognition of how profoundly my sense of what I deserved had been distorted. I appreciate the consideration, I replied. But my decision extends beyond title or focus area. Rosenthal Design Partners' entire practice is built around principles that remain peripheral here, despite our sustainability statements. I need to be in an environment where regenerative design isn't an occasional special initiative, but the fundamental approach to every project. Diane nodded slowly, a hint of respect entering her expression. I understand, though I hope you'll consider that established firms like ours ultimately have greater influence over industry standards, precisely because of our scale and client base. That's a valid perspective, I acknowledged. And perhaps someday our approaches will converge. But for now, I need to be where the gap between stated values and implemented practice is narrowest. We concluded the meeting professionally, Diane, accepting my resignation while expressing hope that our professional paths might intersect in the future. As I left her office, I felt the subtle weight of institutional constraints lifting from my shoulders. Constraints I had accepted for so long, I had ceased to consciously register their pressure. The 2 weeks between resignation and departure unfolded with unexpected intensity. Colleagues expressed surprise at my decision, some congratulating me on the prestigious connection with Rosenthal, while others questioned the practicality of relocating for a position with a smaller firm. Marcus, who had consistently sidelined my environmental innovations, seemed particularly disconcerted. Rosenthal's projects are interesting conceptually, he commented during a project handoff meeting, but their market impact is limited. Most clients aren't willing to pay the premium for those regenerative systems. That's changing, I replied. Insurance companies are beginning to offer reduced premiums for resilient buildings. Municipalities are creating incentives for water-positive developments. The market is shifting toward recognizing the financial value of ecological functions. Still a niche market, he persisted. You've built momentum here. Senior associate would likely be your next step. At a boutique firm, your career path is less defined. His concern, framed as practical career advice, echoed the messaging I had received throughout my life. Prioritize security over alignment, conventional advancement over authentic expression, practical limitations over expansive possibility. The same messaging that had conditioned me to accept less support, opportunity, and investment than I deserved. I'm redefining success on my own terms, I told him. The statement's simple, but revolutionary in its implications. Alignment with my core values matters more than conventional advancement metrics. Outside of work, I focused on practical preparations for relocation. I gave notice on my apartment, researched Portland neighborhoods based on the information Cole had provided, and began the process of determining which possessions warranted shipping across the country versus replacing after arrival. The inheritance that had been restored provided both practical freedom and psychological security during this transition. I could afford temporary housing while finding the right permanent situation in Portland. I could ship cherished possessions, rather than sacrificing them for economic expediency. I could navigate the income reduction of my new position without financial anxiety. More profoundly, the inheritance represented validation of worth that transformed how I approached decisions. My grandparents had believed I deserved substantial support in building my future. That belief, expressed through their financial bequest and my grandmother's affirming letter, countered the subtle but persistent messaging from my parents that my aspirations warranted only limited investment. 1 week before my scheduled departure, Rebecca called. We had maintained limited but cordial contact since our dinner conversation, both recognizing the need for space as we processed the restructuring of our family dynamics. "I heard you're moving to Portland," she said when I answered. Mom mentioned it during our weekly call. "News travels fast," I observed, surprised that my mother had been tracking my plans. We had exchanged only the most perfunctory communication since the settlement was finalized. "Are you excited, nervous, both?" Rebecca asked, her tone suggesting genuine interest rather than judgment. "All of the above," I admitted. "The professional opportunity is extraordinary, exactly the specialized work I've always wanted to pursue. But starting over in a new city, building a life from scratch, it's daunting." "I can imagine. Though I've always admired your ability to navigate new situations with such composure. Remember when we moved from Cincinnati to Boston for Dad's judicial appointment? You adapted immediately while I fell apart over leaving my friends. The memory of 12-year-old me helping my 9-year-old sister adjust to our new environment highlighted how family narratives could simultaneously contain truth and distortion. My adaptation had indeed been smoother than Rebecca's, but not because I was inherently more resilient. Rather, I had learned early that expressing distress resulted in less support than performing capability. Different coping mechanisms, I suggested. Not necessarily different emotional responses. "That's insightful," she acknowledged. "I'm realizing how many of our supposed personality differences were actually just different strategies for navigating the same dysfunctional system." Her observation that our contrasting behaviors had developed in response to our parents' unequal treatment, rather than reflecting innate characteristics, represented significant growth in self-awareness. The golden child was beginning to recognize the artificiality of the pedestal she had been placed upon. "Listen," she continued. "I know things between us are still evolving, but I'd like to help with your move if you're open to it. I have rotation break coming up, 5 days free from clinical duties. I could fly out, help you pack, maybe even drive across country with you if you're planning a road trip rather than flying." The offer was unexpected, a concrete gesture of support rather than mere verbal acknowledgement. It suggested a willingness to invest time and effort in restructuring our relationship on more equitable terms. "That's really generous," I said carefully. "But wouldn't that disrupt your studies? I know how intensive your clinical rotations are." "Some things are more important than perfect attendance," she replied. "Like being there for my sister during a major life transition. Besides, I've never seen the northern route across the country. It could be an adventure for both of us." The suggestion of shared adventure rather than one-sided assistance shifted the dynamic from potential obligation to mutual opportunity. It represented a new language of relationship, one based on reciprocity rather than the hierarchy that had characterized our interactions throughout childhood. I'd like that, I decided. I was planning to drive anyway, to have my car in Portland and see more of the country. Having company would make it more enjoyable. We finalized plans for her arrival the following week, agreeing to spend 2 days packing my apartment before beginning the cross-country journey. The conversation ended with a tentative warmth that felt neither forced nor obligatory, a genuine connection emerging from the rubble of our parents' manipulative system. As I resumed sorting and packing my belongings, I reflected on how profoundly my life had transformed in just a few months. From junior architect accepting limited recognition to senior designer at a prestigious regenerative firm, from financially constrained professional to secure investor in my own potential, from dutiful daughter accepting diminished support to independent woman, reclaiming her full inheritance, financial, professional, and psychological. The transition required learning a new language, not just the technical terminology of regenerative design or the geographical vocabulary of a new city, but the fundamental grammar of self-worth, of rightful expectation, of deserved opportunity. It meant replacing realistic with possible, practical with aligned, acceptable with extraordinary. It meant reconstructing not just my career or financial situation, but my entire understanding of what I could and should expect from life. The process was challenging, disorienting, at times overwhelming. But with each box packed, each arrangement finalized, each step toward my self-determined future, the new language became more fluent, more natural, more authentically mine. I was not merely relocating to Portland or changing employers. I was translating myself into a more accurate, more expansive expression of who I had always been, beneath the constraints imposed by others' limited vision. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. Thanks for watching. Good luck, take care.
After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind, or maybe it has brought back some old memories. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories, and they connect all of us. Everyone has their own unique journey in life, and we all try to understand the world in our own way. These kinds of moments remind us that we are all human, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and always learning something new. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with your friends. Your thoughts and feedback are always valuable to us, as they motivate us to create even better content. Every story has its own unique angle, and our goal is to understand everyone's perspective and make our content diverse and relatable. Stories like these help us realize that life's journey is different for everyone, and by hearing other stories, we learn something new. You can also share your own stories with us. Your experiences are valuable to us as well, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave your feedback. We aim to create content that brightens your mind and gives you new ideas every time. If you've already seen this video before, your feedback is still important. With every piece of feedback, we can improve our content and bring a new perspective to our viewers. Today, what we saw was just a small part of the many stories shared on Reddit and across the world. It's a reminder of how we all try to understand life by sharing our experiences with each other. This video was only an example of how we try to connect with others through storytelling, learning about different sides of life. We hope to continue sharing such stories that help us all learn and grow together. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon. If you haven't already, please like and follow for more amazing content. Your support keeps us going, and we will strive to bring you more thought-provoking and heartwarming stories. Until next time, take care and stay curious. **